believe it's been 20 years? Well, today is the 20th anniversary of one of the most famous video games of all time. A game that gave new life to the RPG genre and popularized the JRPG in the West. Some call it the greatest game of all time. So let's talk about this remake. A lot of sites seem to think it was the PlayStation 3 technical demo that got people talking about a remake, but I was there. In the fan community, there was already a desire for what would eventually be made with mods in later years. A visually buffed, more clearly translated version of the game. The idea of a full-on remake started buzzing in fan circles a couple of years before that tech demo when it was announced they were making Advent Children. When that first trailer hit in 2003 and we saw a fully rendered Cloud swinging that Buster Sword around, that was when rumors of a remake started. The tech demo only amplified this. Now, I remember the first time I played Final Fantasy VII. I was already a fan of the series, having played them since the original on the Nintendo Entertainment System and on through the Super Nintendo. But not having cable or really any interest in television meant I actually missed out on the marketing blitz everyone else seems to remember.
And now, the most anticipated epic adventure of the year will never come to a theater near you. Final Fantasy VII.
PlayStation.
Instead, a friend of mine let me play the demo that came strapped with his copy of the Tobal fighting game. And let me tell you, I absolutely hated it. This wasn't Final Fantasy! This is what Final Fantasy looked like to me. 3D, spiky hair. What was with that ridiculously giant sword? Later, when the game had finally been released, I played it at a friend's house and my mind changed. It was understood during the 2D era that primitive sprite graphics were visual shorthand for the characters. Most of what occurred between the characters was in our heads. We had the dialogue, sure, but the facial expressions and to a large extent the vocal intonations and body language were made up by our own imaginations. This was just the next step in the evolution of the games. And when I finally got my own copy of Final Fantasy VII and progressed at my own pace through the game, I had a moment that made me fall in love with it. After the rug is pulled out from under the party and we find out the president has been killed, we have not one but two or three main villains. There is an exciting escape, an action-packed chase, and another big boss fight, and the party stops for a moment. We get to gaze out over an unknown horizon and consider what came before and where we are going. It's a beautiful moment, both narratively and visually, and then the game does something interesting. We don't just head out into the great yonder, but instead the game makes us wait for it. It turns the camera 180 degrees and rests on a flat, fairly uninteresting palette and makes you organize your party. It knows you want to be let go, but it teases you. And when you finally get let go, you see why. The game, until this point, has taken place completely within the confines of one city, one geographic location. And when it springs you loose for that first time, you suddenly see the sheer scope of what this game might possibly be. And it's breathtaking. This is my main worry for the remake. Sure, all the characters are going to look next level great, but the demands of a modern game are different from what they were in 1997. That moment of leaving Midgar hits you as a gamer. It works on a visual level as well, but the freedom of the overworld map wouldn't work on film, only in a game. Final Fantasy VII is often described as cinematic, but I would argue that what it actually accomplishes can only really be done so within its supposed confines as a video game. It uses its visuals in a way that very few movies do, but really only games do. And when you look at the game's largely top-down perspective, you see that going from these static but gorgeously made pre-rendered background areas to the more modern touch of being able to freely move around like you're playing Uncharted or something kinda means you lose some of the artistic integrity of the original. Take the opening train scene post-Mako explosion, for instance. After Avalanche meet up, they proceed to the passenger car where Barrett alpha males his way to the foreground. This is an entirely static shot, but the blocking is excellent economy. This scene shows us a lot in terms of character development and narrative focus, Avalanche are supposedly fighting for the life of the planet and the oppressed peoples of the world, but we immediately get the impression the group is not exactly a welcome presence here. Barrett is hot-tempered, impassioned, and a bit arrogant. This puts us, as Cloud, at odds with the man, and the scene visually reinforces this by having him sit aggressively off to one side while most of the more sympathetic members of the group are off to the other side of the car. When Cloud does make a move to talk to Barrett, we get even more here, as we learn his point of view by approaching him. And this is then reinforced visually again with a cutscene of the train winding down the city's main pillar into the depths of the slums. I suppose it's possible for the remake to cover this, but I worry we'll lose it. It's not such a simple matter as it may at first seem. Pre-Viz work is complicated, and when you look over what the game's concept art looked like compared to the final product, you can see great attention to detail was made. I love the art design for these games, but it would be a shame to lose everything that makes the game special just to make it prettier.